Hey, everybody, time to get started. If you could just let me know if you can hear me and see me in the chat box on the left, that would be great. Just want to make sure that everything's in order before I launch into the presentation. Okay, Mija, Dawn are both saying that they can hear me and see me, and Veronica's saying she cannot hear. Just a second, guys. Okay. All right, guys, it looks like we're all good. So I'm going to get going. First of all, I want to welcome you to the webinar. Thank you so much for being here today. As you know, we're going to talk all about your accomplishments as a parent and how you use those in your job search. And I'm really excited about talking about this issue with you. I think it's a really tricky situation for a lot of parents when they've spent some time raising their kids and then they're trying to figure out how to talk about that in a meaningful way in their job search. So I want to just let you know that I'm really excited to be sharing this information with you today. So second thing is I want to make sure that you know that this webinar is being recorded. And the reason I record the webinars is so that you can refer back to them, or anyone who wasn't able to be on the call with us today at this time can also have a look at it. So just FYI on that. I also want to get a few admin things out of the way before we go right into the content. So here are the admin things. This app that we're using called AnyMeeting has a chat box on the left side of the screen that we've already been chatting in. If you have any questions or comments during the content of the webinar, please feel free to put them up in the chat box. I will respond to any questions or comments at the end of each slide. Also, if you have questions or comments that happen after we are done with the presentation, you can go ahead and put those on my Facebook page, or of course, you're always welcome to send me an email. You can just respond to any of those emails that I sent you, giving you the information about the webinar, okay? So speaking of emails, I sent you an email a few hours before this webinar that has 3 different documents on it that you might want to use. First is the worksheet that I created to go along with this webinar. So I create these worksheets so that there's an easy way for you to follow along with what I'm saying. Take the notes of things that for sure you're going to want to take away with you to use in your job search. So go ahead and open that up. It's a Google Doc. You can make a copy of it and be taking notes in there. You can print it or put it in a Word document, but just have that with you because it will make it a lot easier for you to follow through on some of the things that we talk about during the webinar today. The other 2 documents are 2 guides that I've created. One is about editing your own resume with a lot of the suggestions of how I do it with my clients. It's a lot of the basics about editing a resume. It's not going to dig into the nitty-gritty or the specifics of your resume or your particular job search, but it's going to help you make that first round editing or cleanup of your resume. The second thing is called the best cover letter in 30 minutes or less. That guide also will help you with your cover letter. So I find that a lot of my clients don't like doing cover letters. That's their least favorite part of the job search. So I created this guide just to make it easy for you guys to bang out those cover letters. Okay, are there any questions about the worksheet or any of that stuff before we get moving on the content of the webinar? If you have any questions, go ahead and put them up in the chat box, guys. Okay, looks like we're good here on logistics. So just before we jump in, I think it's helpful for you guys to know who I am so you can decide whether I'm somebody you want to trust or not. I hope I am. So I'm an expat career coach. I work with people who have international experience. So what that means is a lot of my clients are people who are spouses of people who work internationally, so sometimes termed trailing spouses. I work with a lot of people who have been Peace Corps volunteers before or have worked in some kind of volunteer capacity internationally and then are going back to the US or wherever their home country might be and kind of trying to figure out how to sell some of that international experience. I also work with a lot of people who are not necessarily American, which I am, but work locally in a country for international organizations. And what I find is those people are interested in continuing to work with international organizations. And a lot of times they need a little help translating their skills or conducting a job search that's really fits in with the culture of some international organizations. So those are the kind of people that I usually work with. I work with people by phone or by Skype or FaceTime. So I have clients all over the world. The majority of my clients are American, but I have a lot of dual citizens, or like I said, currently I'm living in Ecuador. I have a lot of Ecuadorian clients. A little bit about my personal background. I myself am a trailing spouse. I've worked on, let me think here, 4 continents over the last 15 years. And in the last couple of years, I've developed this career consulting business, which I think is incredibly valuable for those who are moving around the world a lot. So let's get on with what are we going to talk about today. So just FYI, I'm going to go through this and then I'm going to turn off my video for a little bit and I'll pop back in on the video to answer your questions, okay? So we're going to talk about your most burning question, ooh, mysterious, parenting on your resume, cover letter, and in your interviews. We're also going to talk about why all parents have a superpower, and that superpower is networking in the job search. We're going to talk about those specific skills that you learned as a parent and what the heck to do with them when you're talking to potential employers, why confidence is so important. And then at the end, we're going to put it all together in action steps. I really like to make sure that you guys walk away from working with me with knowing exactly what to do next. And that's this part. And then, of course, we'll talk about some follow-up and what other things to do next. So let's just go right to the burning question, and then I'll take any questions you have. So I was super mysterious, but what's your burning question? I get this question so much from parents that I want to start off the content of this webinar with this. People always ask me, when's the right time to say I took 2 or 3 or 15 or 20 years off to raise my kids? Am I supposed to write on my resume that I was a stay-at-home parent? Fact of the matter is, it doesn't belong on the resume, but there's a couple really good places you can talk about being a parent in your job search. The first one is in your cover letter, right, which is going to accompany your resume always. The next one is in an interview. And the final one is when you're networking, when you're talking to people about what jobs might be available, what kind of things that you would be qualified for. So I'd like to run through each one of these one by one. Are there any questions before I get into why you shouldn't put stay-at-home parent on your resume? All right, guys, I'm going to move forward. Pop up your questions. Even if I missed them, I'll catch them on the next slide, okay? So why shouldn't you write parent on your resume? You know, a lot of people ask me, can I write something like commander-in-chief for my position and my employer is my home? You know, I think it's cutesy and I think it's creative, right? But I don't necessarily think that that's what most of you want to be on your resume, right? You don't necessarily want to be cutesy and creative. Of course, there's going to be some exceptions, right? But I think on the vast majority of resumes, you don't want to include parent on them. Couple reasons for that. Number one, being a parent isn't really professional experience, right? No one's paying you. You're not necessarily, I'm just going to leave it at that. And it's not really volunteer experience, right? We don't volunteer to be parents. So it doesn't really fit with the concept of what a resume is supposed to be. And that's the reason that I say not to include it there, okay? However, I do think it's good to note that you can include other experience that may be related to your role as a parent. And we're going to get a little bit more into this in the rest of your resume. But for example, if while you were parenting your child, you also volunteered to coach the kids' baseball team, right? To coach your child's baseball team. That may be something that you want to include on your resume, depending on what kind of position that you're applying for. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, okay? You really want to make sure that it's relevant to the job that you're applying for, or it conveys something that your potential employer is going to want to know about. You don't just want your resume to be a big list of all the stuff that you've done that's not necessarily connected to the job that you're going for. If you want to include volunteer experience, if it's directly related to the job that you're applying for, sometimes you can include it under professional experience, or you can have a separate section called volunteer experience. So because this is one of the questions I get a lot about whether you're supposed to include that on your resume or not, I want to pause here and see if you have any questions about this. Okay, then let's move on to the cover letter. I am going to turn off my video here for a little bit. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about your cover letter. It's a great place to explain gaps in your employment, which you might have for many reasons, one of which could be that you took some time off in air quotes, because everybody knows parenting isn't really anything like time off, to raise your kids, right? So you can do a couple things on your cover letter. First of all, your cover letter should be about 5 paragraphs, and I go through that in my cover letters guide, right? Exactly what each of those 5 paragraphs should say. But I'm going to give you a little quickie right here. The first paragraph is like an introduction, right? The middle 3 paragraphs are describing why you'll be good for your potential employer. And ideally, you have 3 distinct reasons that your employer should want to talk to you, should want to call you for an interview, okay? And then you have your closing, which is the 5th paragraph. So you've got 2 choices about how you can talk about parenting in your cover letter. First option, you can dedicate one of those 3 paragraphs, the ones that are supposed to describe why it's good for your potential employer to hire you. You can dedicate one of those paragraphs to why the fact that you took a few years off to parent will help your employer, okay? And I really want you guys to understand that the language that I'm using here is really, really purposeful. As you're crafting your resume and as you're crafting your cover letter, and you'll see this also in the guides, the underlying theme here is supposed to be why you are good for them, right? Not why you really want the job, okay? So some of those things might overlap, but the perspective really should be from your potential employer. So let me give you an example. For example, if your background is in HR, let's say, you might say something like, it will make me more understanding and supportive of family-friendly policies that benefit your employer, the employer's bottom line and employee retention rate, right? I have been a parent. I understand why it's so important to have family-friendly policies. I'm prepared to create those, or something like that might be a good little paragraph on your cover letter. Another example, let's say you're a lawyer. Maybe you have a new perspective in some way from parenting that will make clients choose your law firm over another, right? And so that would be a reason that your potential employer might want to hire you, because you have this perspective that's really attractive to clients, or something like that, okay? Second choice on the cover letter, you can add basically maybe like 1 or 2 sentences in your closing paragraph. So that 5th paragraph, you can address the gap on your resume, right? So you didn't work from 2012 to 2015, let's say, because you were raising 2 small kids. You can say something like, as you can see in my resume, I chose to take 3 years off between 2012 and 2015. During this time, I dedicated my time to raising my 2 small children and learning more about graphic design. So the reason I like that little snippet right there is it's a really good option for you if you could put something else together with your parenting, right? So in this person's case, they did a class or study something more about graphic design, which is presumably relevant to the employer. So if you did some volunteering, took a class, organized a group, something like that, it's nice to put that together maybe in the closing paragraph. So that's where you can talk about this. And again, as soon as we get over this sort of burning question that I wanted to cover right at the beginning, because I know it's important to a lot of people, we're going to dig even deeper into some more examples about exactly how to do this. Are there any questions about covering the gap in your resume in your cover letter? All right, awesome. Let's keep going. So your interview is a great place to weave in or to mention some of your accomplishments as a parent. It works the best if you have some significant accomplishments, right? As a parent, such as accomplishments maybe as a volunteer, or things you did as a parent that are directly related to the job you're trying to get, or perhaps overcoming significant challenges as a parent. So let's do an example, because I think this is the easiest way to really understand it, okay? Let's say you're a stay-at-home parent and you're now going back to work. You raised a special needs child, let's say, who's now going off to college, and the feat of ensuring that she made it to college you think is award-worthy. That feels like one of your biggest parenting accomplishments. So depending on your field, this experience might be directly related, right? So if you're going to work with children with special needs or their families, your experience is really relevant. If you're going to work in college admissions, it also might be really, really relevant. But chances are it's not always going to fit together so nicely, right? Not a lot of us are always going into the exact field. So a good way to weave your stay-at-home parent time into the interview is to use examples when an interviewer asks you about your greatest strength, perhaps, or asks you another question in the interview. So you could say something, if you're that parent of a child with special needs, you could say something like, your greatest strength is perseverance, right? That although people told you over and over again that your daughter wouldn't ever go to college, you didn't take no for an answer. And you did A, B, C, D to make it happen. Right? So you're taking a characteristic, an accomplishment that you have as a parent, and turning it around and demonstrating to your employer why it's valuable to them. Because you persevere. You're not going to take no for an answer, and that would be valuable to your employer. You can also consider how you would use skills, the skills you use as a parent to help your colleagues or supervisors, right? So the role of a parent is oftentimes in the supporting role, right? That we're kind of like the background and our kids are the ones who stand in the front, and we're trying to help them get to wherever they need to go. So how do you support your children? And are you able to do that in the workplace somehow, right? And this is the translating I'm really talking about on this slide, the second bullet there. So let's say you're applying for a job doing event planning, right? And you know you'll be really excellent at it because you're spectacular with details, or one of those people who makes spreadsheets that everyone else is jealous of your household goods when you move, and you have every single thing planned out by the minute and gracefully handle any hiccups. So that's one of your things that you do as a stay-at-home parent, right? Your job is to plan that move. Your job is to make sure your kids are ready for the move. All your stuff is ready for the move, all of that stuff. You want to figure out how to tell that story and talk about your skills in a way that makes it easy for your potential employer to understand, right? And if I go into an interview and I'm like, oh, I'm so good at making spreadsheets for moves, it's so hard to move from country to country to country to blah, blah, blah. That's kind of talking more about me than about why I'm the right person for my employer, okay? So what I want you to do is, let's say if you're the person who's really good at the details for a move, use the same language that you see in the job description. So if you're applying for a job in event planning, you can think of your move as an event, something that you planned, right? So find the commonalities between your move and the events your potential employer might ask you to plan, and then talk about it in those terms, right? So do they want you to manage vendors? Great. You've managed movers and, the office at your spouse's organization that plans the move, and this, and this, and this. So you know that you'll be capable of managing multiple vendors at the same time. I want to give you a couple notes of caution here. And Mija, I see your question. I'm going to get right to it. We got to be kind of honest about this, right? So sometimes interviewers don't really care about the fact that you have kids and that your role as a parent is important to you and you have a lot of accomplishments in that area. So I want you to be ready to change tacks in an interview if you can see that your answers aren't really resonating with your interviewer, right? So sometimes you'll have a spectacular experience. Your interviewer will totally get what you're saying. They might have kids themselves. They understand the value of what you're bringing into the table. And sometimes the interviewer will not be in that situation and might not react the same way. So you want to have, here's my examples of my accomplishments as a parent, and maybe a few backup things that you can use if that doesn't seem to be resonating with your interviewer, okay? Or in some cases, just that the interviewer isn't really responding that well to the value that you bring to the table because of all these skills that you have as a parent. Maybe that's an indication to you that this employer might not be quite the right fit for you. That's a call that you're going to want to make. All right. Then the second word of caution is don't make all of your examples or answers in your interview about your kids or about your parenting skills, right? So just as you wouldn't draw all of your examples in an interview from your college experience, you don't want to focus on just one aspect of your life in your interview. So consider other experiences that you've had both professionally and personally when you're responding to some questions and preparing your answers. And if you don't feel like you have that much else to draw on, go out and get some more experience. So you can go out and volunteer, join an organization, do something else so that you have a little bit more to draw on, right? It's always good to have a little bit more well-rounded experience. All right. Okay, so Mija's asking, what's the best way to describe how I worked for a short duration, between posting in different countries. Both of my jobs lasted only 4 months due to a long clearance process and my husband's job transfer. Okay, so Mija, I think the right thing to do there is to put those jobs on your resume, right? And list the months that you worked. And then I think it would be reasonable in your cover letter to write something about why those were such short periods. So I imagine that your concern is that employers are going to be like, why did she only work there for 4 months? What's going on here? Did she leave every single job? Should we be worried that she's going to leave us? Or maybe was she let go for a certain reason? Did she not do something right? And so in order to just nip those concerns in the bud, it's a great idea to address that on your cover letter, right? And one of the really, really good ways to do it is to demonstrate why you were passionate about those positions, but you were required to leave, right? So saying something in your case like, I'm not sure exactly what your jobs were, but you could say something like, I worked both as the roving administrative assistant in the embassy and as the economic specialist. Both of these positions, you can say something right there, like some details about what kind of skills you developed in those positions that will be beneficial to your employer. And then maybe like the last sentence in that paragraph or something like that would be something like, unfortunately, I was required to move when I had only had the opportunity to work there for 4 months. I look forward to continuing to use the skills that I gained as an economic specialist, or whatever your title was. What do you think about that, Mija? Okay, cool. Mija says that's good. All right, so we have Dawn here who's asking a question about what to do about references. Great question. So references can come from various areas of your life, right? They don't only have to come from paid professional positions. That said, you really don't want to pick a family member or a friend as a reference. Why? Because if I'm thinking about hiring you, and let's say I'm thinking about hiring Dawn, and she has on her references list her friend Susie, and I call up Susie and I'm like, hey, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about Dawn. And just to get started, how do you know Dawn? Oh, she's my best friend. Or, oh, we were both moms in, Ethiopia together. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to trust Susie because Susie is Dawn's friend, right? So what I want you to do is find some people that you've worked with in any capacity, right, that can give me an unbiased opinion of who you are. So that might be that you were the person who organized the Diplomatic Women's Craft Fair, or you volunteered at that event and you want the volunteer coordinator to be one of your references. You can definitely use those people as your references. And I think that will work very nicely. Let me just think if I want to add anything else here. The other thing I would like to add is it's very important to prep your references for what kind of things that you anticipate that they're going to say about you. So let's take the example of the Diplomatic Women's Club and the craft fair. Let's say Dawn volunteers there each year and the volunteer coordinator is a great person. Dawn might really want the volunteer coordinator to highlight certain things about her, right? So even though that she just signed up to be a volunteer, she was really, really committed and she did A, B, and C. Or she signed up as a volunteer routinely every single year. Or she was always on time, or she had a lot of good creative ideas about how to engage other volunteers. So you kind of want to reach out to that person, and when you ask them to be your reference, which you should always do, and they say yes, then you say, I'm applying for this position at the World Food Program, and one of the things they're looking for is somebody that's really creative. I know that one time you mentioned to me that you valued my creative ideas. Would you mind mentioning that when you talk to the person from the World Food Program? Veronica's asking about principals or teachers at your kid's school if we worked in the PTA. Absolutely. The PTA should not be viewed as a kid-only activity, and we're going to talk about some examples of this very shortly. The PTA is not a kid-only activity. The PTA is your volunteer activity. So if the principal was the one that you were working with, or some teachers were also on the PTA with you as colleagues, that is great. Again, you want to prep those references for not talking about you as John's mother, but talking to you about as the secretary of the PTA, right? And so just that little switch in language will really professionalize what you did in the PTA instead of it appearing that you just showed up to meetings as so-and-so's mother. Does that make sense, Dawn and Veronica? Okay, Veronica's saying it's all good. All right. So let's get a little bit more into the nitty gritty here, right? So we've talked about where and when you can talk about your parenting, but I want to get into networking, which will make you feel really good because this is totally the parenting superpower. Okay, guys? All right, turning off the camera here. Networking is most parents' superpower. Why? Because we as parents are able to network so much more easily than we were able to prior to having kids, right? You all know this. It's so easy to run into people, to meet people when you have kids, right? You naturally have to be at events with a whole bunch of other parents. You have an instant connection to all the other parents of the children in one of your kids' classes or in the play group or whatever your kids do for their social activities, right? People who are not parents don't have the opportunity to chat with people at sporting events, in their classes, and it's tougher for them to strike up a conversation because they don't instantly have something in common with other people, okay? So I don't want you to forget about that superpower in your job search. As you may or may not know, networking is the number one way to get a job offer, right? So just having an awesome resume, just writing that awesome cover letter, or just doing a great job in the interview may not get you a job offer, but networking is going to get you called in for an interview. Why? Because a lot of positions will get multiple applications, right? There's going to be 10, 20, 30, 100 people who apply for the same position. And when the people in HR or the people who are going to supervise the position go through those applications, what do? It's hard for them to pull out from a resume exactly who would be really great at the job. But when they see your name and they're like, oh yeah, I know Mija. She's so-and-so's mom. Let's call her in for an interview. Or, oh yeah, I know Veronica. She and I work together on the PTA. Let's call her in for an interview. So that's why this is your superpower, because you have a lot more connections than people who don't have kids. And the other good thing about this in particular is you probably won't have to tell that many people that you're a parent or talk a lot about your accomplishments as a parent, because if you do a lot of networking and people know that you're applying for the job ahead of time, or they know who you are, they know your name, they probably already know that you're a parent. And a lot of your connections are because you're a parent. So there's a couple things that you can do to maximize this networking that you can do as a parent. Now, I say this, by the way, also for people who are not parents, that getting out and interacting with people socially is absolutely the best way to network. Going to networking events or career fairs, it makes a lot of people anxious, and honestly, people don't get a ton out of that. But interacting with people in social settings and growing your circle of people that you know and your contacts is really the best way to network without it feeling really nerve-wracking in any way. So what are a couple of things that you can do to maximize your networking when you're at these kid-related events? Well, specifically, you want to start learning more about other parents by asking them questions about their work or backgrounds that are not related to your kids. And this kind of has a twofold, honestly, advantage, which is one, of course, it will help you with networking and understanding where people work and what people do. It might give you some ideas about, certain directions that you could pursue for employment. But also it allows you to be more connected to a community, right? As you get to know more about people and you understand who they are beyond the fact that they're just so-and-so's mom or so-and-so's dad, it really brings you closer to people. And that's valuable for expats who are trying to create that sense of community. You also want to use the chances you have to talk to parents at sporting events, etc. A lot more about who they are beyond their role as a parent. All right, let us jump into this, which is my favorite question of the whole slide. Can you please tell me what other superpowers I have? We all want to know what we're great at. your job search will be massively improved if you can see the value in what you did as a parent and be able to clearly explain that, right? So let's jump into a few things, and then we're going to jump over to the worksheet where you're going to have a couple questions to answer. So what kind of superpowers do you have that are as a parent, right? So we already talked about networks, right? Number two, you might have a unique perspective that employers are looking for, right? So I say this to expats in general, but also especially to you guys as parents. So I talk about a unique perspective for expats in general in terms of the places that they've lived, the languages that they've spoken, the skills that they've acquired from living in a particular country. But that same thing can happen for you guys as a parent, right? You have a unique perspective because you're parenting a 5-year-old while living in Falls Church, Virginia, right? You know the services, the entertainment, the everything that's available for a 5-year-old, right? You know the shortcomings of certain organizations that cater to the to 5-year-olds, and that can be a real advantage. Most parents, again, this is really general, but most parents are pretty spectacular at time management because they've got to figure out how to parent their kids, how to work, how to volunteer, how to take care of this, how to do that, how to do all those things at the same time, which goes right hand in hand with juggling, right? How do I make all of these things happen at the same time? I have all of these responsibilities. How do I make it all happen? Also, a lot of parents are really good at pivoting. I think all of us have had that experience of, hey, I have this whole big plan for the day, but oh, dang it. We woke up in the morning and my kid started throwing up and never stopped. Change all the plans, get this kid to the ER, get these other kids taken care of. And while we see that as sort of just a natural thing that we do as parents, it's really valuable to employers to know that you can drop everything and pick it all up and put all those pieces back together. And then finally, patience. I hope that a lot of you parents have a lot more patience than I do as a parent, but I think that's one thing that we learn over time as a parent is how to really be patient. And sometimes that does translate into how we deal with colleagues or how we deal with clients or customers. And that's important. So now I want you guys to look over at your worksheet. So let's look at questions, let's see, number 2 and number 3 there. So we just talked about networking. I want you to list there 3 people that you can begin to network with, right? So you might know that somebody in your kid's class, the mom works for one of the companies or organizations that you're interested in. Or you might just know that she used to work in graphic design or whatever the particular element is that you might like to learn more about, write her name down there. So the idea with this question is that you're going to list your first 3 people that you want to network with, right? And then after you do those 3 people, you'll do another 3 people. And then you'll do another 3 people. And so you're expanding your social circle, not only socially, but also professionally and beginning to learn a little bit more about what these people's careers look like. So let's do that one. And then let's also look at question number 3. I want you to check off. So I've listed a few things here, right? Networks, unique perspective, time management, juggling, pivoting, patience. Let's check off here if any of those things are things that you think could be your superpower. And then add an example, right? So like, I'm so good at pivoting because A, B, or C. You know, jot a little example that will jog your memory as you're coming back to this, because we're going to revisit this list a couple times. Well, not just in this webinar, but after the webinar, you're going to want to revisit this. So let's respond to those 2 questions there, guys. I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Throw up your questions over there in the chat box and take a couple minutes to jot down your notes. Okay, now there's going to be other stuff that you guys have learned or practiced or perfected as a parent, and those are going to be unique to your situation. But let me tell you a couple ideas so that you can pull out what you might have done, okay? So number 1, there's the kid stuff, right? So any crossover between your kid experiences and the position that you're applying for. So if we think back to the example of the woman who had a child with special needs that she helped to get into college, right? Her crossover, if she's applying for a position in college admissions, is going to be really clear, right? So she navigated this whole college admissions process with a child with special needs, and that's something that she'd really like to bring to the table, right? Your particular kid experiences may be different based on the needs of your child or your style of parenting, and especially the position that you're going to apply for. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is the stuff that you do because you have kids, right? Like a lot of our volunteer stuff that we're doing, like Veronica's talking about the PTA, you wouldn't really do that if you didn't have kids. But because you have kids, you have that option to volunteer in that particular way. So you can think about volunteer activities that you do because of your kids. Like, did you coach a team? Do you volunteer at the school, either like on the PTA or tutoring or in your child's classroom or any of that other stuff? Are there any kind of clubs that you lead or help with? Or like I said before, even when you have little kids, you organize things like play groups or special outings or, things like that. You can also have developed particular skills because you have kids, right? Stuff like event planning, right? I talk to so many parents who are like, I could have never, or I never thought about planning a party for 100 people that had this big theme and all the decorations and the blah, 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 until I planned my kid's first birthday party, right? So you may have developed some skills in event planning because you have kids. Same thing with kind of creative endeavors, right? Some people find out that they're really great at sewing or these particular crafts or whatever just because they have kids. They never picked those things up until they had to make their child's Halloween costume or something like that, right? And they kind of got into it. The other things could be unique to your family, right? Particular needs of your children that you learn how to respond to or whatever. So on your worksheet, on number 4, I want you to go ahead and check the boxes of the skills that you have, some of those ones that I've listed. And then I've also listed a whole bunch of other choices, right? So it might jump to you immediately some other things that you want to include in terms of accomplishments that you have as a parent. Now, just a quick note here. As you're going through this, let's not get super reined in by what your particular field is, right? Let's just create a big list for the moment, and then you can pick and choose off this list depending on the position that you're applying for, okay? So have a look at that question. Put up your questions in the comment box, and then we're going to get moving on to the next thing. Okay, guys, now let's talk about linking your accomplishments or your skills as a parent to your job search. So you want to take that list that you've created, and maybe you just have a few boxes checked now, but after the webinar, you can really dig in and come up with this a little bit longer list, or maybe even a little bit more specific list in your case. You want to take that list of skills that you just came up with and cross-check it with jobs that you're applying for, right? So you want to figure out what the employer is looking for that you have because of your full-time parenting experience. And then also figure out how to supplement that with your prior experience or education, right? You can consider working for companies or organizations where you have unique abilities, right? So maybe during your time parenting, you realize you have really unique abilities that you want to share with somebody else. And you're going to look in that direction instead of picking up what your prior career was. So let me give you an example. Let's say you raised your 2 children in the Arlington, Virginia area, or you come in and out, right? You live in Arlington, Virginia, and then you move overseas, and then you come back to Arlington and you move overseas. So you may, and let's say your background is in public relations, okay? So maybe instead of going back to the corporate world, you might look for positions at organizations or public institutions that do PR that's specifically targeted to families in the Arlington area, right? So you have this really unique perspective now, and you're going to capitalize on that. This could be something like park districts or state agencies, the YMCA, et cetera. So your experience as a parent with that in the exact population that they're targeting is very, very valuable to this position in PR at the YMCA, let's say, okay? Then last thing there is be ready to convince potential employers. So remember when I talked about translating your skills a couple slides ago? This is going to be really important to know how to do before you even sit down and write your cover letter or go for your first interview. You need to be really clear about the right way to explain your skills in a way that your employer will really understand. So again, let's go and use the example of the person in PR who's looking for a job in the Arlington, Virginia area, okay? So his tendency or her tendency might be to say, I have 2 kids in the Arlington public schools, so I know a lot of people around here. But that's not really going to cut it, right? Let's get a little bit more targeted. Let's translate it exactly to what the potential employer wants to hear. It would be better to say something like, I have 3 years of experience dealing with the Arlington Public Schools, the Park District, and the library. During that time, I've noticed specific ways that we could reach your clients or customers, depending on who the organization is. I intimately understand what parents in the Arlington area are looking for from whatever the name of the organization is that you're applying for. And I'm excited to help you plan a strategy that reaches them and convinces them to work with us or become members or whatever the thing is, right? So in theory and ideally, that person will come up with a response or come up with a way to convince potential employers that they're the right person to hire using some language that they see in the job description or maybe something that they've learned from their contacts there if they have good networks, right? And so perhaps in that case, this person who's applying for the PR job knows that they need somebody to plan a strategy to reach this particular population. And that's why he weaved this into his answer, right? Let's go just one more slide and then I'm going to take questions, okay? So one of the questions that a lot of people are worried about is how to answer in particular, so why weren't you working during X period, during this gap, right? And people are really worried about saying the wrong thing or offending their interviewers with their response to this question when they talk about having taken time off for parenting. I was doing a presentation to the US Embassy and somebody asked, well, I took time off to raise my kids, but I'm worried that other women won't think that that's the right decision. So how do I talk about it in an interview in a way that doesn't offend somebody or doesn't convey that I made the right decision by taking time off, but this other person made the wrong decision by staying at work? And I thought that was a really valid question. So I want to really address it here today. First of all, I think you should be prepared for people to disagree with your decision, while you are still okay with the decision that you made for your family, right? So don't make judgments or don't try to assume what other people are going to think about the decision that you made for your family. All you have to do is leave it at, it's the right decision for your family in your particular situation. And also be aware, like this person, correctly thought when she asked me the question in the presentation, that some women don't feel that they had the choice of whether they had to go back to work or they could stay home. And that can be a sore point for some people, right? So you want to really be gentle about this in an interview. So how to say it? Here's a good example. Several factors led me to make the decision to stay at home with my children between 2012 and 2015. Our family had the opportunity to move overseas because of a job offer my husband received at the same time that our second child was born. The cost of daycare for 2 children, the prospect of looking for a new job in a foreign country, and my desire to take advantage of the unique opportunity of not needing to contribute financially to our income for a shorter period all led me to choose to take 3 years off. Now I'm looking forward to getting back to the field that I love. I'm going to just pull out a couple things here that I think are really important, guys. Number one is the person really shared a little bit more about the different factors that went into their decision, right? So for some people, the only factor is I wanted to stay home with my kids. But for others, there's multiple factors like this person said. And I think having multiple factors allows people to get a little bit more into your decision-making process. And also there's more chances for you to connect and for people to agree with you if you have a few different reasons, right? Second is I really love the last sentence here. Now I'm looking forward to getting back into the field that I love. Why? A lot of times people are concerned about gaps in their resumes because they're worried about people being a little out of practice, right? Or people having left for some reason that they can't control, right? So employers are like, oh, if she or he left to raise kids, what's to say the person won't leave again, right? And so that's one thing that we want to combat. in particular when we're talking about this. So by saying that at the end, we're really, the person is really showing that they're excited to get back to work, right? It's not like I have to get back to work to make money or whatever, but I'm excited to getting back to this particular field that I really like. And so if you can demonstrate a passion for the field or even a passion for the employer or something like that, there's the undertone there is that you're going to be committed, right? That you want to go back to work. It's not like a need thing. And I think that's important. Then I see that I only have moms on the call today, but dads do have to also contend with something else. So if stay-at-home dads, will have other sort of judgments or thoughts made about them. It's still a little less common for dads to take time off to raise kids. And so they might, automatically be viewed as quote unquote weird or heroic, right? We've seen those two sides of the coin, and neither of those is really an accurate description either. So both for moms and dads, you're going to want to come up with this response to the question: why is there a gap in your resume? Why did you choose to take time off to have to take care of your kids? So that doesn't create anxiety for you as you're going in the interview, right? That you know how you're going to respond to it and you feel comfortable with your response. All right. Does anybody have questions or comments that I can respond to now before we go on to the next slide? Okay. For those of you that don't know, confidence is actually the thing that's going to get you the job, right? So networking is going to get you into the interview, and then having a lot of confidence in that job interview is going to be the thing that ultimately gets you the job. Let me just share a link with you guys here that you'll probably think is interesting. So hiring decisions are made based on, here's your link, guys. Hiring decisions are made based on who is the most confident candidate, okay? That might be surprising to you because a lot of us think that it's made on based on who's the most experienced candidate, but that's not actually how it works out. It's the person who feels the most confident, who can say confidently, I'm the right person for the job, right? So given that, you don't necessarily want to focus on whether or not you're the most experienced candidate or what they'll think about the gap on your resume, but instead put some time into gaining your confidence and your abilities and what you have to offer. And part of that is gaining confidence in the skills and the accomplishments you have to offer as a parent, right? That you gained from being a parent. So here's a couple ways to boost your confidence. Number one, you want to truly decide that you're the right person for the job, okay? So find a job that you're interested in and figure out why you're the right person for the job, and the employer should choose you. Okay, Dawn is saying that she can't hear me. Let me just double check if other people can hear me. Okay, so Veronica and Mija are saying they can hear me. Let me see if maybe Dawn can reconnect. All right. Okay, so let's go back to decide that you're the right person for the job. So you want to figure out why you're the right person for the job and why the employer should choose you instead of others. So these reasons should focus on why the employer gains something from hiring you. And you want to do this before you edit your resume and write your cover. The reason for that is I want you to have this really at the forefront of your mind as you're drafting your resume and your cover letter. And I want you to have that at the forefront of your mind as you're prepping for your interview, as you're thinking about how will I answer these questions that they ask me. You want to be really certain that you're the right person for the job. Having these things in mind will really help you to be convincing in your resume and cover letter and also in the interview. All right. The next one is a big one for parents who have taken some time off. You want to practice the skills you'll need for your job, right? So a lot of us get really worried about having lost some skills when we took some time off for whatever reason, right? To raise kids or to travel or whatever our thing was. And if that's the case for you and you can't confidently say, I can definitely do this job, or I can still do this job, you want to ask yourself why. What are the things you're concerned about? Why don't you think you can do it anymore? Or why don't you think you'll be great at it anymore? What are you worried about that you don't have that someone who didn't take 5 years off, let's say, does have? So it might, in some cases, it's something really technical, right? Like a particular software that you know how to use or don't know how to use. If you don't know how to use a particular software that you know that you're going to need, go ahead and learn it, right? There's a ton of free classes available online. There's a ton of tutorials on YouTube. You can go back and learn those things and really gain your confidence. Then if you learned it, try to get the chance to practice it, okay? They could be other things that are not technical skills, right? They're things that you remember being really good at in an office setting, but you haven't had a lot of practice using those now that you've been home for a while. So maybe it's something like interacting with adults in the workplace, right? If that's your situation, you might want to volunteer for something that allows you to work with other adults exclusively, right? That might be a committee at your kid's school, or organizing something amongst other parents. It helps to remind yourself what you're good at. So don't let your interview be the first time you've put on a suit in a long, long time, if you're kind of anxious about that element of it. Arrange a meeting that requires you to wear it, or put on your quote unquote career woman costume, like a suit or whatever, for your next trip to the dentist. So you want to start to think of yourself in terms of your job title, or the job title that you're trying to get, right? And these tiny actions make a huge difference in how you see yourself, right? How you view yourself, which dictates exactly the way potential employers will see you, right? So the way that you define yourself is the way that they're going to define you in their first impression. So I want you to jump over to the worksheet to number 6, and I want you to write down the skills you think you might need to learn or regain, right? So you may know right off the bat, what are the skills that I need to learn before I can go back to work in graphic design, marketing, whatever your field is. And other ones you're going to need to think through a little bit. You're going to need to look at those job descriptions and decide, oh, actually, this is the thing that I need to really get focused on. So jot those down now. All right, let's go on to number 3 as you're finishing that up. Number 3 is you're going to want to learn and practice the skills that you need for the job search. And this is something that a lot of people don't put enough emphasis on, right? So let's go back to what I said at the beginning, which is that confidence in an interview is what's going to get you the job, right? And also confidence that you're able to do the job that the employer needs you to do, and do it really well and do it the best. That conviction will come through in your resume and your cover letter, and then it will be very clear in your interview, right? So a lot of times that lack of confidence doesn't have anything to do with lacking the skills for the job, like we talked about in number 2, but everything to do with lacking the skills to do the job search correctly. So the job search a lot of times can be demoralizing. You know, you can send out a lot of resumes and not hear anything back, and that can kind of get people down. You can go for multiple interviews and not getting any offers, leading you to wonder, what's going on here? Like, what am I doing wrong? Why is it that no one's biting, right? No one's interested in what I have to offer. And the fact is that the job search is a little bit like a game, right? And if you know how to play it, you can get through the process quickly and come out on the other side with a job and a paycheck that you like, right? So times might have changed if you took a long gap off from last time you had to look for a job, and you might be concerned that you're not doing it right. And this is really exactly where I come in. So I help people create resumes that they really feel proud of, and that makes them feel confident in their abilities and convinces employers that they're the right person for the job. Same thing with cover letters. We create cover letters together that they know that will attract employers' attention, right? And that's the confidence that you need to have in those couple documents. I work with my clients to prepare for interviews so they don't feel nervous, and they know exactly what they're going to say. They walk out of interviews with no regrets, no wondering, did I say the right thing? Did I address the gap in the right way? They don't second guess themselves. And if this is an area that you're worried about, any of these areas, let's talk. I'm going to throw up over here in the chat box the page on my website where you can learn how you can work with me. If that is something that you're interested in, you can have a look. I can recommend one of my standard services for you, or build a custom service that is tailored exactly to your job search and exactly what you need. The fact is that you've taken a couple years off. Now you're ready to get back to work, and you deserve to get a job that you enjoy. You deserve to start making the money that you want to make for your family. And you deserve it now, not after months and months and months of searching, right? So just want to throw that out there. So I want you to go over onto the worksheet now on number 7 and have a look at this question for you. What part of the job search has you most worried? I want you also to check over there, what's the thing that you're concerned about? And then I want you to let me know in the chat box too. So as you check that box about which part has you the most worried, you can make a plan about how you're going to focus on that and gain your confidence, particularly in that area. So let's say you're not so sure that your resume is going to convey exactly what you want it to convey. What's your plan for making it better? Are there some resources that you can take advantage of? Are you interested in working with somebody like a coach? Do you have a friend that can help you revise that resume, right? So you want to make a plan of how can I gain confidence in these big areas of the job search? I need to do all of them really, really well. How am I going to get there? All right, guys, let's put it all together in action steps. Like I said at the beginning, I love for people to walk away from my webinars or from working with me one-on-one, knowing exactly what to do next, not to be confused about what the steps are. So let's make it really clear here. Step 1, make a list of all the skills that you have, including those that you learned as a parent, right? We started to do this at the very beginning of our worksheet, where you jotted down some of the skills that a lot of parents have, and then you started jotting down some of the unique skills that you have. Mija, I see your question. I'm going to get to it right at the end of this section. Okay. So you want to start with what you wrote on your worksheet and go from there. Step 2. You want to look over some job advertisements, right? Which you can find millions of online that interest you. What are the kind of things you think you might like to do? Then you want to make a list of the skills that they're looking for in the job announcement, okay? If you know that you already have those skills, just jump on to step 4. If not, you want to look at step 3, okay? Step 3 is make a plan for how to get those particular skills. So let's say you keep looking at jobs for event planners and you just love what they do, but they're asking for a particular degree or knowledge of a particular event planning software. Go ahead and make a plan for how to gain those particular skills, right? In some cases, you might see the jobs that I love require me to have a 4-year degree, okay? Great. Some of you may be able to pursue a 4-year degree. Some of you may not. And so if you cannot, look at alternate step 3 that I have there. Look in a different area where your current skills would be valued, right? So you have 2 options here. You can look at the job announcements and then figure out how your skills look in, or you can look at your skills and then find the job announcements that go with them. Either way. Okay. Step 4, and notice that I've put this before the resume, before the cover letter, before the interviews, is to start networking. Why did I put it here instead of doing all that other stuff first? I put it here because a lot of times when you're networking, you can get job leads, right? So you can find out that so-and-so is hiring an administrative assistant. This other company is hiring somebody to manage their volunteers. This other company is hiring somebody to work in PR. And you can figure out which ones are the ones that you would fit into. Misha and Veronica, I'm just going to go over this slide and then we're going to get right to your question. Step 5, after you have some ideas after networking, what kind of jobs are available? You've looked online, you kind of have a better sense of what the market looks like for you. You want to create a draft resume for the types of positions that interest you. 6 is to get the cover letter that goes along with that resume. And 7 is always to get an outside perspective. So you take that resume, you take the cover letter, and you give it to a coach, a good friend, somebody who works at that company who says, oh yeah, you would be really qualified for this, or you wouldn't be so qualified, or how about highlighting these other skills, or it doesn't look like this is a good match for you, right? You really need somebody else to tell you that. It's hard to do it on your own. Step 8 is practicing your interview skills prior to getting called for an interview, so you're ready for all the kind of questions that they might ask you. And then step 9, get a job, hopefully. If you have all those pieces in place, that really strong resume and cover letter, a really stellar set of responses for interview questions, things that you know are going to impress, you will get that job offer and you will start making that money that you want to make. Now, both Mija and Veronica are asking the question, how do you figure out what types of jobs that you're qualified for? Okay, great question. Now, guys, where that comes from, let me turn on my camera so I'm talking to you. Where that really comes from, guys, is that list of skills, right? So people who are wondering about the response to this question, you want to put down a list of all of your skills. So some of you might have a resume that you were using before. You took some time off from your professional career. Some of you might not even have a resume that you've started with, right? So if you have a resume, take that resume, put it on the screen or on the paper, and then take your list of skills and accomplishments that you have over this time that there's been a gap in your resume, right? And then you kind of want to see, where are those skills and accomplishments lying? So for some people, it might be really clear, right? Like this event planner person. The person who did event planning before, then they took some time off, but they planned a lot of events like kids' birthday parties, moves, PTA fundraisers, all this stuff. So that's going to really mash together nicely. They're going to take that and they're going to move on to their careers, and they're going to move on to their next position as an event planner, okay? For some of you, it's going to look like just a big jumble of stuff, right? So it's going to look like, I used to be in finance, then I took some time off to have kids, and I was on the PTA, and I coached the baseball team, and I had a child who needed, I don't know, extra tutoring in math. And so I learned all about extra tutoring in math, and I did that one-on-one with my child. Okay, so those things don't look like necessarily they go all together, right? What you want to do is pull out that list, and then with that list in your head of all that different stuff that you've done, and if you don't have a sense of what you'd like to do next, go ahead and start looking at job announcements, right? Go ahead and start kind of putting some limitations on what you'd like to do, right? So let's say you have this finance background, you have math tutoring, you have coaching the baseball team, and you have, I can't remember the first thing I said, maybe being on the PTA. Go think about, from those different things that you did, what were the skills that you really liked doing? Like, did you really like tutoring in math? Was that something that was really fun to you? Then perhaps the direction that you go is thinking about tutoring other kids, or working within a school as a aide or something like that. Or let's say that the thing that you really loved was the baseball coach, right? You had no idea that you liked coaching kids' teams, but you loved being a baseball coach, right? So maybe the direction that you start to look in is something in youth development, or something at a park district, or something at a gym, right? Where you have the opportunity to interact with people who are participating in sports, or kids who are participating in sports, or kids who are participating in physical activity in general, right? Let's say during all that time as a parent, you were like, I don't like any of the stuff that I'm doing. I would love to go back to finance. I just want to work on my spreadsheets. Well, why can't I do that? You can do that. Just because you have a gap in your resume and you didn't do a ton during that period that's directly related to what you did before, doesn't mean that you can't return to that, right? So you can go start to look for jobs in finance. Now, if you have a gap on your resume for any reason, right? If you were a parent, or if you lived overseas and you couldn't work, or any of these things, you can always go back to that same field that you worked in before. But there's a couple of things that you should expect. Number one is you may expect to make a little bit less than you did before, right? Because you do have this gap in the time that you've been practicing your profession. Number two, you may not be hired on at the same level. So let's say you left as a manager and you were managing 10 people, you might be hired on at a lower level and have to work your way back up again. Now that's really tricky for us expat parents, because we're coming in and out, right? Like a lot of you may be living in a certain area, but you know you're going to move overseas in 3 years. So you might not have that time to work your way up the ladder. That's another tricky thing about the expat job search. That is unfortunately a reality. But there's always the option of working for a place or targeting places that you can work that have telework options, right? So especially if you do something that's almost exclusively computer-based, or maybe you don't have to interact with clients face-to-face that much, you can always kind of parlay a job that you're working in an office in person then to telework in the future if you work for a company who's really friendly to that. Okay, I feel like I gave you a big long answer there, Mija and Veronica. What do you think? Does that make sense to you? I'm going to go ahead and unmute Mija and Veronica. Guys, if you have anything you'd like to, just a second, let me see. Here we go. If you have anything that you'd like to say or talk out that particular issue, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, thanks a lot. That's Veronica speaking. It does make sense. I have huge gap in my employment because we have been moving a lot, and also I worked as a CLO in one of the posts, and I probably am going to work in this particular post as management assistant. So my skills are all over the place, and it's really difficult to concentrate of what I really want to do right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you said you think you're going to work as the management assistant at this current post?
Yes.
Okay. And how much longer do you have at your current post?
We are looking at 2 years. The thing is that during this current post, I want to think at what I want to do next, because my kids are grown up already, and I want to use these 2 gap years as kind of prepare myself for a more targeted job search.
Perfect. Perfect. So have any ideas come up in your head about what you might like to do after this particular post is over?
You know, it's all over the place, because in addition to like skills, I used to work in consulting field before. I have also 2 languages, Russian as my native and Spanish. I speak fluently 3-3.
Great.
So I don't think I can actually go back into the consulting field, because it was a long time ago and it was very particular onto the like Russian market.
Okay.
So basically, I need to look at something completely new, you know, like to start new career while I'm in my 40s already. So. Okay,
so consulting is out. It sounds like you might like to use your languages if you can. So what else? What else is kind of like, have you thought of as maybe this is something I'd like to do? You know, has that ever come up for you?
Well, I'm kind of interested in health and like proper eating.
Okay.
You know, I'm like a health coach, this kind of stuff.
Okay. Okay. So actually that gives us a great example to work with, right? So let's say, let's take your case, and we know that you're interested in nutrition, health coaching, stuff like that, and that your day job is working at the embassy in positions that you think are fine, it sounds like, and you do them to make money, but that's not necessarily where the thing that you really want to do for the next 20 years, let's say. Am I right?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the beauty of your situation, Veronica, is that you do have 2 years to kind of explore these different options, right? So you're in a great spot to be able to kind of test the waters on a few different things to see what you want to do when these 2 years at this post is up. So it sounds like to me, one direction you'd like to explore a little bit is something like a health coach, maybe a nutritionist, maybe something that requires additional schooling, maybe not, right? And so in your case, I want you to give that a try in your hours that are outside of work, right? So let's say you're like, maybe I'd like to be a health coach. Give it a try. Find one of your friends who's like, yeah, I would like your help. Could you coach me? And see what that feels like, right? See whether you like it, if that feels satisfying to you or not. And then based on some of the experience, kind of giving that a little bit of practice, you can decide whether you want to invest money and time into a course in order to become a health coach, or a course in order to become a dietitian, or you know, what direction feels right to you. But I do really think that you're in an excellent situation to be able to test some of this stuff out. You know, you might try the health coach thing and say, I don't really want to do health coaching because I want to take it a step further. I really want to become a nutritionist. Or I don't really like the health coaching side, but what I would like to do is meal planning for you know, a cafeteria or a nursing home or a whatever. How do I do that? Let me test that one out. How does that feel?
Yeah, I was thinking along those lines, and yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. And Veronica, if I could just say one other thing that's related to this, the content of this webinar in particular is, you know, a lot of times when our job titles don't look exactly the same as the job that we're going for, we kind of take that and throw it out the window, right? Like management specialist, that has nothing to do with a health coach. I'm going to throw it out the window. Like, I don't even care about that on my resume. But I encourage you, as you're doing this job in the next 2 years, to pull out the skills that you could use also in a future profession, and also really take notice of the things that you like about being a health coach, and figure out if you can incorporate it into being a management specialist, right? So as I'm saying this, I know you guys are like, how are you connecting those dots? I'm not exactly sure, but let me give you an example. So as a health coach, you really help people, right? You speak one-on-one with people, try to figure out what their particular challenges are, and then give them potential solutions, right? Here's one thing that you could try if you are trying to incorporate more vegetables into your diet, right? And a lot of times when you're a management assistant, or even Chloe, let's go back to your job as Chloe, people are coming to you with the same thing, right? Coming to you and going, I have this problem and I'm not really sure how to solve it. What do I do? And you say, here's some ideas for you. Okay, somebody comes to you as Chloe and they say, I don't really like it here. I feel really lonely. I don't know what to do. And as Chloe, you say something like, a lot of people go through that same situation. Let me give you a few strategies for not feeling lonely. I felt that same way too. Number one, here's a couple suggestions of clubs you could join. Number two, would you like to volunteer and help us for Chloe events? Number three, blah, 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 blah. You know, become a member of this particular Facebook group where you can get a little bit more support, right? And so some of those same things that you might have done in Chloe, or you do as the management assistant, are similar skills, not in the exact same way, but similar skills that you would use as a health coach, right? Don't sweep it all under the rug and be like, this is a waste of my time. It's not. You are continuing to develop the skills that you can use in your next position. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay,
Oh, thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can. Hi, is this Mija?
Hi.
Hi.
It's been very, very helpful because I think a lot of times, you know, when you're looking at the different job posting, you think about, well, I've never done that before. I've never done this. And if they're looking for specific, you know, degree, I don't really have that. And so I think a lot of uncertainty comes from, well, for me, the main part is having to always move so much. It never allowed me to develop a career track per se. So I had to basically take whatever was available in the countries that we lived in. And even if I wanted to do, let's say, online course, the internet was not always an option for us because my husband was with the USAID for a number of years. And there was no way that I could do an online course because the internet was so intermittently available. And if I would have stayed back in the States all my years of raising my two children, most definitely I would have worked at least half time. I'm not the kind of person that was thinking that I can't handle, you know, job if I have kids. And so I think looking back at my almost 15, 16 years now, I just turned 50, and I think the hardest part for me is, like you said, is building that confidence back, trying to draw from a little bit of this and that I've done all these years. And I feel that if I can get an interview, I will be able to land the job. And it never has been an issue for me as far as the interview goes. It's just finding out, you know, even this particular posting is going to be only 2 years. I have really hard time convincing myself or allowing myself to make the potential employer believe, oh, well, you can invest a year of training only for me to stay for another 7 months, and then I'll be posted overseas. And I think ethically, that's been the hardest time for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to somehow come out with some sort of strategy to be able to get myself out to the interview. And I think for me, um, what you have mentioned about parenting, what you have mentioned about volunteering positions and running different events at the embassies and gaining all this knowledge that I never would have if I'd stayed in the States. I have to somehow play that up in a very positive manner. But the hardest part for me is having been a trailing spouse. I've always been feeling like my career was always secondary. My goal in building towards career has had to always be put on the back burner, and that's the hardest part for me.
Yeah, Mija, I feel your pain. I just want you to know, I totally get where you're coming from. I would say that that is the most challenging thing about the trip.
I think I lost you. I can't hear you right now.
Yeah, me neither.
Going to leave, right? And so that's always has to be an element in your job search and something that has to come up in every. Okay, hold on. We're having some audio problems here. Okay, Mija, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good. Sorry, guys. The thing about being an expat is twofold, right? Is that one, you can, you know what, guys, I'm just gonna mute everybody just for a second here and see if that helps us. Okay, just a second. Sorry, guys. There we go. I hope that's going to help if we don't have background noise. So the twofold problem is that it's hard to build a career in the same manner that you would build it if you were staying in the same spot, right? And that's tricky. And then the other thing is this element that you always have to be the person who's leaving, right? So even when people want to hire you, it always has to come up in an interview, but I'm going to be leaving in 2 years, right? And so kind of the thing, and I have a whole a webinar actually exactly about this that I think it would be valuable for both of you, and I'll send you an email after this letting you know where you can find that one. The thing about it is that you have to decide why it's worth it for them to hire you, even if you are leaving in 2 years. And I think the easiest way to do that is to really focus in on the uniqueness that you bring, right? So Mija, in your case, you know, with your spouse having worked for USAID in various posts, maybe you want to capitalize on your experience in one of those posts. Or Veronica, like you're saying, like you speak Russian and Spanish, like how are you going to capitalize on that, you know? And so maybe targeting particular nonprofits that make grants to organizations in Russia or make grants to organizations wherever you've lived, Mija, can be that way to draw that, like, that connection that shows that you have something more to offer than other people, right? So if I'm thinking about hiring somebody and I have 10 people in front of me, and Veronica has experience in Nogales where we give a lot of grants and nobody else does, then all of a sudden Veronica becomes the front runner candidate, right? So, you know, kind of drawing on that uniqueness of your experience and finding organizations that come in line with what you have versus trying to fit into somebody else's mold can be really helpful. But I think that whole element of that we talked about with confidence on the slide about confidence, which is you have to be convinced that you're the right person for the job, is key here. So even if you're only going to be there for 2 years, why should they still hire you? And you've got to make that argument, right? The employer is not going to come up with that themselves. They're not going to decide that it's worth it to hire you, even though you're going to be there for 2 years. So you need to come up with, why is it worth it to hire me, even though I'm only going to be here for 2 years? How is it going to work with me being here for only 2 years, right? So walk them through the logistics. I'm here for 2 years. This is what I'm going to do in the first year. This is what I'm going to do in the second year. 3 months before I leave, I'm going to, put out the advertisement for somebody to replace me. I'm going to interview them. I'm going to train them. It's going to be seamless for you when I leave. Or, I work in a position that telework could be really possible. So how about we give this a year and a half, and then we have a conversation about telework to see if I can keep working for you when I move overseas. I'm really passionate about what your organization does. I'm really excited about this position. Given the choice, I'm sure I'm going to want to stay working for you for as long as I possibly can, or something like that. Mija, I'm unmuting you again. So you decided to, and this is going to be where we're going to wrap it up, guys. I'm really paying attention to the time here for all of you that are on. You decided not to make it very clear in your last job that you were going to leave in a couple years?
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's a big question that I have from expat spouses always is, should I bring this up in my interview? And I think a lot of times people see on your resume what's going on, right? They see that you've kind of like moved every couple of years, and a lot of times they'll ask you a question about that. So they'll say, something like, I see on your resume that you've moved every 2 years and you lived overseas. How long do you plan to be in the Washington area or whatever? And so a part of the confidence in the interview is knowing what to say, right? So like, I'm not moving again. It's like a bold-faced lie. That doesn't feel right. Saying like, I'm only going to be here for 2 years. Sorry. That doesn't feel right either, right? So some prep prior to the interview of, okay, I know I'm only going to be here for 2 years. Basically, why should you hire me anyway? Why am I still the best fit for the job, even if I can only give you 2 years? And then what does it look like after those 2 years? Right? So you really walking them through that whole process is the only way to convince the interview. Now, let me be totally honest with you. I don't want to sugarcoat this at all. There's some employers that will just say, no, you're going to be here for 2 years? Absolutely not. We don't telework. We don't want anything to do with that. We need you to be able to commit for longer than 2 years. And you know what? If that's the case, then that employer isn't the right fit for you, right? And it's disappointing that if you were to live in the Washington area for the rest of your life, then it could be a good fit. But the fact of the matter is it just might not be a good fit.
Right.
Your job search is going to be a little tougher than other people's. That convincing argument is a little bit harder than somebody who just says, oh yeah, hire me. I'll be here indefinitely. But that's kind of the reality that we have to work within. And that's the best way to approach it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, I have one more slide here. Folks, let's just get finished up here and I'll let you guys go. So what's next? You've got the resume guide. You've got the cover letters guide. Use those things in your job search. Use those things to prepare your resume. You can get really great tips on interviews in particular and specific tips if you're a trailing spouse, which it sounds like Mija is and Veronica is and a few other people on the call. Or if you're a return Peace Corps volunteer, which is another big group that I work with, by heading over to my webinar library. So my webinar library is almost ready. My web designer is working on it right now, and I'm hoping within the next couple of days, I'm going to be able to send that to you. So you can access that. You can learn a little bit more about the trailing spouse job search, some ways to combat it, in addition to what we talked about today, really concrete tips for interviews that I think would really help you. So I will send you that as soon as it is available. Also, the recording of this webinar is going to be available for you for free if you want to listen to it again or review it in any way. It's going to be available for free for 1 week, and then it's going to go over to that webinar library that there's a tiny fee to access, okay? So if you have any specific questions while you're prepping, or Veronica, in your case, if you have some questions about how to wade through this whole, like, what do I do next process, you can go over and post them to my Facebook page. People post questions there, and I respond there so that we can share it with everybody who's interested. And now it is time to get to work. So go ahead and do your job search stuff. I know you guys are going to do a great job. I'm going to ask you guys a big favor if you don't mind. I have a 5-question survey about this webinar that I would really love for you to click on and answer for me. So I am always trying to improve my content. I'm always trying to provide additional information to people who need it. And so this survey is just going to ask you kind of, what did you think about this webinar? How could I make it better? And what would you like to see in the future? Because I'd really like to create things that are just for you guys. So if you wouldn't mind answering the questions on the 5 questions on the survey, I hope it takes like less than 5 minutes. I would really appreciate it. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for being here with me on the webinar. I had a great time interacting with you guys, and I really hope to hear how your job searches are going in the future and if there's any other way that I can help. So have a great rest of your week. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to everybody, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Bye.